Remedy Entertainment is known for making rather interesting games that may not always turn out to be groundbreaking, but tend to always have a great following around those games. Their most recent release of Control may be their best playing, as well as best and most interesting story to date. But today, I want to take a look back at one of their earlier releases and rather cult classics, Alan Wake. I remember loving this game when I first played it over 10 years ago, and I still rather love the concept now, but I think playing this game now is rather flawed and has some issues. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of positive things about the writing and storytelling in Alan Wake, but there are some things that Remedy definitely improved on over the years. Also keep in mind, this video isn't a review of the game, as it is an examination of the entire game. Every game that Remedy makes tends to have a hook with their combat that ends up being rather part of the story. Max Payne has their bullet time combat, Alan Wake has you needing to fight off darkness before doing damage, Quantum Break deals with time, well the whole concept of time actually, and finally Control deals with essentially telekinesis and a special gun. Now when it comes to Max Payne, I only played Max Payne 3, which was developed by Rockstar, so I can't talk much about how those games had an impact on Alan Wake in general, as the first two did come out before Alan Wake. Alan Wake spent roughly 5 years in development, and based off the early trailers, the game that they're originally making was rather different. It seemed more of an open world adventure game where you're trying to discover what is going on with your writing coming to life, as well as finding your muse. I'm not sure if that part was actually part of the early game that they're working on though. The open world aspect seems quite apparent when looking at the final product, with how vast the landscape is, as well as how often you have to drive through parts of it. They probably didn't want to scrap the road that they spent all that time working on. However, they did change a decent amount of what the story was, and how the game was delivered to the player, as it became a linear game at release. Be sure to leave a comment down below about what you think of the game, as I had several moments where I almost stopped playing altogether and almost scrapped this project. I want to talk about the story and characters first, as those are my favorite parts of the game before I dive into the combat and what I had more of the issues with. You play as Alan Wake, a widely known author who has been struggling with writing for a while now, as he and his wife take a vacation to possibly help with his headspace, although his wife has a slightly different motive for this vacation. There's a quick tutorial section here telling you how to play the game, but I'll mention this section here later in the video. You enter a town called Bright Falls on a ferry, a very small town where everyone knows everyone. If you haven't seen the show Twin Peaks, this game takes heavy inspiration from it, being in a small town with some strange stuff going on, but I can't talk in too much detail what that show adds to the inspiration of the game, as it has been many years since I watched it. Also, a quick side note, the game is heavily sponsored by Energizer, Verizon, and a few other products, not me. One of the early complaints I do have in this game is rather some poor quality cutscenes. The animations definitely have some issues here, and I'm not sure why that is since the rest of the game looks fantastic at times, but this early scene of Alan Wake leaving the car makes him look like a serial killer to me. Okay, back on track. Alan Wake's wife, Alice, tells Wake to get the keys to their cabin from a man named Carl Stuckey while she goes and gets a few things from the store. You enter a place called Oh Dear Diner, which 1, is a great name, and 2, where you see several main characters. Rose, a very bubbly woman who is a big fan of Alan Wake. Apparently in this world, authors are rather superstars. Rusty, a local sheriff who loves coffee. Then there are the 2 Anderson brothers. They are local artists that will be discussed more later. They're alright. Then lastly, you see Cynthia Weaver, a lady who seems scared of the darkness. Once you reach the back, you meet some random woman, whose actual name is Barbara Jagger. She just hands Alan the key and directions, no questions asked from Wake, just accepts it. Definitely nothing strange from this lady at all.
Carl couldn't make it. Unfortunately, he was taken ill. But I have the key for you and instructions on how to get to the lake.
Okay.
I wish you a good stay in my cabin. I'll come by later to check how you've settled in. And to meet your wife.
Once you leave, the man you're looking for runs out of the diner and apparently people don't check their mirrors. This tells the player that if they couldn't already tell, something's off. Cauldron Lake is the focal point of the game, and where Wake and Alice go to stay. You also find out Alice is trying to help Wake get back into writing. She's a loving wife who wants what is best for Wake too, and is doing everything she can to help. Also, Alice has a phobia of the darkness, and once you get settled in, the lights go out. Here's the first instance of Alan being kind of a dick towards Alice, as he pushes her and storms out, allowing her to fall into the lake shortly after, and for the story to get moving. This is my favorite aspect of the story. You wake up 1 week later in a crashed car, no memory of what happened at the lake after you jumped in after Alice. Psychological thrillers are some of my favorite aspects of storytelling. The player and protagonist doesn't know what is going on. When making your way around, you find some pages of a manuscript. Upon examination, Wake wrote it, and it is describing the events of what is going on, as well as what is going to happen. This is awesome, and I wish they did a bit more with this concept, but it works for this game's favor. I wanted to talk about the game's combat later, but there's no avoiding it here. The enemies here are called the Taken. They're covered with darkness and you have to shine a light at them in order to do damage. When the enemies come closer, you can also dodge, which is inconsistent at times. Either it doesn't work or you dodge into the attack. Perhaps I'm used to dodging in other games. That's the short of the combat, and I'll mention more later on in that section. In between all story sections, you have to fight your way in between. It is a video game at the end of the day. The atmosphere is rather extremely well done too, with how the wind picks up on occasion, the light shafts coming down from the light sources, and the sound effects. It is kind of amazing to still see even 10 years later. You also come across some interesting world building with these TVs playing episodes of a show called Night Springs. These are all one-off episodes, kind of like Twilight Zone. For example, one episode is a man putting a gun to his head to commit quantum suicide. Instead of him dying, another universe had him die. It's dumb, but I love it. Except there's some machine that stops him from dying, which gets unplugged. This is just one episode and they're all great, minus maybe one. People in this town believe that the show is based off their town Bright Falls too, since some strange things happen here over the years. They also learned that Wake wrote an episode before too. Coming up is the big revelation of what is going on, and where I wish they took the game. Sheriff Sarah Breaker comes to rescue Alan Wake and informs him that there is no cabin on Cauldron Lake, as well as a rather quick reminder of a head injury. Wake doesn't say what is going on since it would make him look crazy. She also says that there is no cabin and she will take you there too. You reach the lake, no cabin, and then go off to the police station, as well as a late title card, and seeing that the game is actually played out in episodes. The rest of the story can now go on, as each episode is slightly different in concept too. The second episode starts off with a flashback in New York with Wake and Alice in their apartment, showing how much that they are in love and that of course Wake would do no harm to Alice. I don't know how much money a well-published author makes, but it makes me question my life's choices if they're able to afford places like this as well as his lifestyle. There's also a small scene later in the game that Wake's last book was the best-selling book to ever be released. I'm mentioning this now since I want to know if that's a thing that actually happens. I know maybe 3 authors, all of which everyone just knows. But anyways, now we're back to present day being examined by a local doctor who was just called in from a fishing trip. I love these little details when it comes to world building, and it really pushes to show that this is a small town. There are pictures of missing people as well as a creepy looking cat. Here's also where the worst subplot gets introduced. There's a phone call from a kidnapper. I really dislike this aspect of the story, but that'll be explained more soon. He says that he has his wife, and acts like an extremely stereotypical bad guy. I know this game is technically satire, but I wish that aspect wasn't introduced. You get some directions and then meet the local shrink. Dr. Hartman is a garbage person, and Wake punches him in the face. I'm okay with this, but he should have been arrested. This is straight up assault in front of cops. But then Barry Wheeler comes into play, and he's just great, especially later in the game.
Have you been drinking?
No! Look, Barry, I'm missing a week, and someone's got Alice.
Do
and
you
everything's
understand what it sounds like when you say stuff like that? Don't get me wrong, it's a good story, could be a bestseller. But when you start confusing fiction with reality, you're buying yourself a ticket to the funny farm.
Wake tells Barry everything that has been going on, and of course he calls him crazy, but pretty soon he starts to believe him. You go on the hunt for the kidnapper, seeing the place that you were at earlier get destroyed, as well as a man from the diner, Rusty, being extremely injured and likely killed. Eventually you fight your way through and meet up with the kidnapper, and a thing that happens far too often in this game, you lose all your equipment besides your flashlight. He acts like a typical bad guy, but you may be able to tell that he may not actually really know what is going on, and is just there. He is after the manuscript that Wake has been writing, seeing as how it brings things to reality. Perhaps he just wants to use his power for his own selfish greed. Also, this man was on the ferry when he first entered Bright Falls. At some point, you get separated from the kidnapper and have to make your way back to Barry. Here's also the part that occurs that should have been avoided if people acted normal. Rose calls Barry saying that she has pages of the manuscript. How on earth did she know about these pages being missing? She's a super fan of Wake. She would have kept hold of these pages to keep for her collection. On top of that, she talked in a very dull and monotone voice.
Barry Wheeler speaking.
This is Rose.
Rose?
I found Mr. Wake's pages.
Oh, you sweet, brilliant girl.
Could you and Mr. Wake come get them? I live in the trailer park outside the town.
We'll be there in less than an hour.
I know.
See you soon.
Have a great day. Hope you come back soon. Welcome to the Oh Dear Diner.
Something that should have immediately told Barry that something was off. Yet this never gets mentioned. Barry saw her earlier and talked to her several times before and should know something sounds off with her. There's also several instances in this game where you have to follow an extremely slow moving person, and I hate when games do this. Just make the path to move through longer or something so I don't have to stop every 3 seconds for them to catch up. Perhaps this is an issue of playing on a mouse and keyboard. You didn't talk to Rose again and still don't question anything, but you're also put to sleep here, so I'll let that pass. At least they show off how much Rose actually loves Wake here. In comes Nightingale, an FBI agent who just shows up just cuz. He is beyond terrible, with only one redeeming factor. Every time he sees you and calls out the Wake, he says a different author.
This is Agent Nightingale, FBI! Get him up, Hemingway! You're under arrest! You move a muscle, I'll unload right in your goddamn face! Stay right where you are, Slade!
I'm honestly shocked how many names he can quickly think of and say one. I still don't understand why he showed up to town. Perhaps he's investigating Alice's disappearance, but that news just broke to the local police. There's also a good chance that I missed a page telling why he was here. All I found out was that he has a drinking problem and is avoiding something. Anyways, Nightingale has no regard for people or gun safety as he just opens fire at Wake no matter who is in the way, as well as seemingly being drunk on the case too. As Wake is on the run, he eventually comes up to one of the worst gameplay sections in the game. The Dark Presence takes over these inanimate objects to throw at Wake. This would have been fine if they introduced this mechanic with one of them and then added a couple more later on. But no, there's like 6 of them and they fly right at you very quickly with barely anywhere to maneuver. This took me at least 5 attempts since I died almost instantly each time. I know some people may defend this section because you saw a manuscript page saying that this was going to happen, but that doesn't mean it should have been difficult in such a tight space like this. The story objective now is to try and find the kidnapper, who changed the location of where to go. You fight your way there and eventually find out that he doesn't have your wife and was lying. He seemingly gets killed by the Dark Presence as you jump to your hopeful safety in the lake, which probably should have killed you. But then you get rescued, and possibly one of the best twists if they stuck with it. After the fall, Alan wakes up at Dr. Hartman's clinic. He is told that he was having another episode and that everything that happened in the game prior was all in his head. Now hear me out, this could have been an awesome turn to the story. Running around at night with people trying to attack him. In order to hurt them, he has to shine light at them, and when he kills them, they all disappear. Everything he thought of came true. It all fits in with being a schizophrenic. I know this would have made the game worse off, but I think that it would have been interesting if you were trying to conquer your thoughts in order to cope with the loss of your wife. I like this idea, but the actual story choice as well as the connection with the future game Control was better. I just think that there's a game with that idea, or perhaps one was already made. Well, shortly after this daytime break and a quick little talk with Dr. Hartman and the Anderson brothers, things start to go bad again. Strange things start to happen, and it seems like the real reason Hartman wants Wake is also the manuscript. Hartman is extremely selfish and wants to drug and control people, and then use the manuscript coming to life to benefit him as well. The darkness attacks, and has another time where I have to stop playing from frustration again. However, this one is partly my fault. You have to dodge a ball in an enclosed space, and the way it moves seems slightly off, but this one is mostly on me and bad timing. Barry and Wake have to make an escape from the clinic and make their way towards the Anderson farm, where they learn that they have to deal with this kind of stuff like this before. Also, can someone please tell me how you're supposed to turn this generator on without being able to kill these enemies or having them catch up? The flashlight only stops them for about a second, and that isn't enough time to get this started. I hate this section a lot. Eventually I just ran for it and attempted to coax everyone back away from me. Then you make it to the concert stage at the Anderson farm and have a fun little showdown, minus some issues of not being able to pick up items when pressing and holding the button. This shotgun took me like 10 separate tries to get, but I like this part, it's great. You learn that Anderson's had a song that talked about Cynthia Weaver, the lady that is obsessed with flight that we saw earlier. Wake also learns about what happened after he came up from the lake at the beginning of the game going after Alice. He was forced to write from the lady that we saw at the beginning of the game, Barbara Jagger, and eventually bring back the darkness. Well, Nightingale comes back, says some more dumb lines, and it gets killed off, showing the other sheriff what is really going on.
It was an interesting read. Well, I've got you now, Raymond Chandler. It's all here. All the evidence, including conspiracy to murder a federal agent. There's no way you're walking out of here. You hear me in there, Bret Easton Ellis? Huh?
The rest of the story kinda just goes from here. With the help of the sheriff, Wake and Barry go after Cynthia Weaver in order to find something that is needed to stop this from continuing. It is a fun little trip since you're able to fight with other people instead of being solo. A man named Thomas Zane seems to have written a thing called the Clicker into Wake's past life, as well as had Cynthia Weaver hold on to it as well. I'm not sure if this is a plot hole, as it does get mentioned later on in the DLC, but I'll mention that soon. Quickly, I should mention Thomas Zane's character. He's an author that came here a long time ago with his girlfriend Barbara Jagger. I think he killed her too based off an audio clip I heard in the game. He thought she was taken over by the darkness since he was also forced to write, and was never able to escape the dark place, but does try to help Wake. After acquiring the Clicker, you make your way back to the lake to stop the madness from continuing, and where I have a few story issues. When reaching the lake, you are accompanied in spirit with Thomas Zane. You also see an identical person to Wake, a man called Mr. Snatch. Wake doesn't say anything about this. Mr. Snatch is going to replace Wake in the real world too, yet Wake doesn't seem bothered by this.
It has
has no heart. It's filled with darkness. You must fill its heart with light. Don't mind him, he's Mr. Scott. Your friends will meet him when you're gone. Use the clicker.
The darkness does try to get in your head too in order to make you stop, but that doesn't work. You make your way inside the cabin and kill off the darkness, and Wake goes and writes the ending of the book, where the game just ends in a cliffhanger, as well as a to be continued sign.
It's not a lake. It's an ocean.
Alan, wake up.
Well, the DLC is great, but practically doesn't add much to the story. You are fighting yourself in the head, and I like this idea a lot. Your sane self is the player character, and the other half of your mind is writing things to stop your progress. I actually really like this DLC. Barry's there talking about how you're just crazy and everything seems off. Wake even questions Thomas Zane about the clicker, and he kinda just brushes it off, as well as finally mentioning Mr. Snatch again, but they also kinda just brush that line off too, as they don't talk much more of it outside of a few lines. Then there's an awesome little section where you're going through a changing Ferris wheel type environment, and if I moved a little bit faster, it would be awesome. It is honestly one of the most unique things I've experienced in a game level design wise in a long time. Unfortunately, the DLC also just ends with a hint that there will be a sequel that would never come. They did release a standalone short game on Xbox Live years ago, but I believe that was just a mini story similar to the DLC. The actual continuation came with Control's DLC. Well, it sorta did. I'm gonna partly spoil some of Control here, so if you don't want that, there should be a small time skip here as well as a thing on screen saying where to skip to. In Control, there are things called objects of power and altered world events. At least I believe that's how they are stated in the game. The typewriter in Alan Wake is actually an object of power. It comes from an alternate dimension, or something like that. I'm still trying to understand that game at times. Well, the events at Bright Falls ends up being looked at by the Special Bureau, as well as his disappearance. He stays mysteriously gone until the new DLC of Control, but as I haven't finished it yet, that's all I can say. I'm glad they tied the two universes together. It makes what happened even more interesting to me. I'm not sure if that was planned from the beginning, as I really doubt it, but it was great. I'm going to quickly say my issues with the gameplay, as I didn't have much fun playing the game, as well as sometimes where I almost wanted to stop playing altogether. The dodge mechanic seems broken at times, where it just doesn't register, allowing Wake to just get hit. This is poor and caused several deaths as I would just walk slightly faster towards the enemy. I also greatly dislike how just about every single time enemies show up, the camera pulls away to show them in slow motion, taking control away. Most of the time when this happens, there are also enemies that are just not shown here that are closer to you and just hit you. It is a shame too, since the light mechanic is kind of awesome. It is unique and works mostly to the game's favor. There are also some small boss battle arenas that tends to deal with vehicles and some other things as well. They're okay at times, some go by too quickly if you spam flashbangs at it or just focus at the boss when ignoring the other enemies. The weapons feel good too, but it's a shame that you lose all supplies between every single chapter as well as in the middle of some chapters too. I like how the flare gun is just like a rocket launcher and that the flashbangs are just really efficient grenades. There's fun to be had when playing the game, especially just wanting to see the story, but most of the game has way too many enemies appearing behind you as well as too many times having control taken away. I'm glad that their future games feel and play much better. Hopefully one day they decide to make another game called Alan Wake 2. Perhaps they're considering it, or maybe they're just don't fit out their control. I like how each of their games are rather a one-off thing lately, and self-contained. I can see them making another Control at least, especially since that game seems to be the most well-received game that they put out lately. Plus for there to be another Alan Wake game, they would need another special typewriter, as well as bring him back from the darkness. Perhaps it's best to keep it mysterious. I didn't want to lead this off with a negative talk about the gameplay because the game deserves better. The character interactions at times is fantastic, mostly with Barry and the main sheriff, Sarah. I like how they made the sheriff that is responsible and smart a woman, and the FBI bumbling idiot a man. This feels like it was done on purpose to me, but I may be wrong. She is willing to give Wake a chance and shows compassion, yet is still there to make sure everyone is safe. Wake has some issues and is very arrogant, and perhaps that was due to his success. I'm going to mention this again. I've never seen an author rise to this level of fame that is so rarely recognized. I still don't know what Stephen King looks like, yet I read several of his books. There's also no way that he got a crap ton of money from them due to publishing agreements, but that is pure speculation. I like how Barry antagonizes you during the DLC and seems rather sane, yet silly at times. Like a lovable person in the wrong place. He reminds me of George Costanza on Seinfeld, but actually isn't lazy and does stuff. I like how happy Rose seems, like the truth of the road hasn't affected her one bit. I like how the Anderson brothers took the whole Greek mythology aspect of their band and lifestyle, although they seem rather violent towards the clinic staff. I like how great Wake's voice acting is, especially the narration, and that goes towards Thomas Zane too. I like how they let the player question at times if what is going on is actually made up or not. I can keep going, but I think I made my point. There's a lot to like about this game, even when you look past the combat. Perhaps others love the combat though. Alan Wake is rather underwhelming and flawed to play, even though the narration and storytelling is unique. If there was more slower sessions between combat that wasn't just walking around a small area talking to a slow-moving character, it could have been even better. The early things shown off years before release saying that you'd be able to explore and uncover the truth about the mystery could have been even better to me. But what is done here is definitely a good stepping stone for what was to come in the future with Control. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to see more critiques and analysis in the future. I try to have at least 2 videos done a month, but that also depends how long the games I'm playing on actually take to beat. Cyberpunk 2077 seems like it could take a little bit, as I want to experience most of the game before saying my final opinions on it. However, that should be the next video coming out, hopefully early January. I want it done before Hitman 3 comes out for sure. But until then, I'll see you on the next one.